She took care of her boss's house for 20 years, until she found a letter with her own name on it. Chapter 1. The Silent Loyalty. For 20 years, Maria moved through the corridors of that house like a ghost dressed in flesh. She was the first to wake up, the last to go to bed. Her hands scrubbed marble floors, her fingers polished crystal chandeliers that reflected lives she would never live. The family, Mrs. Helena, Mr. Augusto, and their son, Raphael, floated above her world, acknowledging her only in passing nods or clipped instructions. Maria never questioned her place. She had been hired when she was barely 20 after her mother died and left her adrift in the city. Mrs. Helena had found her then, a fragile girl scrubbing dishes at a corner diner, and offered her stability. "You'll be part of the house," Helena had said in that firm, elegant tone. Not part of the family, never that, but part of the house. And so Maria became a fixture, quieter than the ticking grandfather clock, more reliable than any alarm system. Every morning, Maria opened the heavy velvet curtains of the mansion's parlor, letting in a slice of sun that cut through the cold air. She dusted the piano no one played anymore, arranged fresh flowers in the crystal vase that Helena insisted should always sit by the grand window, even though she rarely entered that room herself now. Years passed in the silence of her devotion. Maria knew every creak of the floorboards, every quirk of the old house, every stain that no one else noticed. She watched Raphael grow from a mischievous boy into a distant man, watched Helena age and grow thinner, more brittle, her presence in the house becoming as ghostly as Maria's own. But Maria never intruded. She never asked why Helena stopped hosting the grand soirees that once filled the house with music and laughter. She never asked why Mr. Augusto stopped coming home some nights, or why he left altogether 5 years ago. These were not her stories to tell, not her wounds to tend. She was there to clean the remnants of their lives, not to understand them. And yet in the quiet of her small attic room, Maria sometimes wondered, how had 2 decades passed so quickly, leaving her still here, in the same uniform, in the same house, while the family's lives fractured and evolved around her? She had no children of her own, no partner. Her world was this house, and lately that world had started to feel heavier. It began subtly. Helena's sudden absences, weeks at a time. Raphael's abrupt visits, locking himself in his old bedroom without speaking to anyone. And then the locked drawer in the study. Maria had always respected the boundaries of the rooms she cleaned. She never opened what was sealed, never touched what wasn't explicitly hers to touch. But the drawer was different. About 6 months ago, she noticed it. Helena sitting at her grand mahogany desk, pen trembling in her thin fingers, sliding envelopes into that drawer and locking it with a small brass key. Then Helena would leave for her spa retreats, or wherever she vanished to, leaving Maria to dust around that desk, the locked drawer like a whisper she wasn't supposed to hear. At first, Maria thought nothing of it. But as weeks turned into months, and Helena's presence in the house became more ghost-like, the drawer seemed to pulse with an invisible energy every time Maria entered the study. One morning, as Maria polished the brass handles of the desk, her reflection distorted. In the shiny metal, she caught herself staring at the drawer for too long. She shook her head, scolding herself internally. This was not her business. But something had shifted. Helena was away again, longer than usual. The house felt emptier than ever, the cold settling into Maria's bones even though it was late spring, and then, that morning, as Maria made the bed in Helena's room, she noticed it. The key, lying on the nightstand, as if left there by accident or intention. Maria stood frozen, the smooth handle of the key gleaming under the soft morning light. Her breath shallow in her chest. For 20 years, Maria had never overstepped, never broken the invisible walls that separated her life from the family's. But now, The key was right there. And for the first time, Maria felt something she hadn't in years. Curiosity laced with dread. She looked around the silent bedroom, then back at the key. It was small, almost delicate. Her fingers trembled as she reached out to touch it, but she stopped short. Not today. Maria swallowed hard, stepping back. She gathered the sheets tightly and left the room, her pulse racing in a way she couldn't explain. But the key stayed burned in her mind, and deep in her chest, a door that had been locked for 2 decades creaked open. Chapter 2. The Key That Shouldn't exist that night. Maria couldn't sleep. The image of the key gleaming on the nightstand haunted her closed eyelids like a forbidden memory. She tossed beneath her thin blanket. The attic room unusually warm despite the breeze sneaking in through the cracked window. For 2 decades, she had buried every question, every stray thought that could lead her into dangerous territory. But this wasn't just curiosity. It felt like an invitation. By dawn, Maria was already dressed, her hands more unsteady than usual as she prepared Helena's usual breakfast tray, even though Helena wasn't home. Muscle memory guided her through the kitchen. Coffee brewed strong, 2 slices of toast lightly buttered, a side of marmalade. She carried the tray up the winding staircase, each step heavier than the last, until she reached the threshold of Helena's bedroom, and there it was. The key still rested on the nightstand, as if waiting for her. Maria set the tray down gently on the polished side table, her eyes flicking to the key again. "No," she whispered to herself. She forced her gaze away and walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. But as the day dragged on, hours spent dusting, washing linens, polishing silver, the key echoed in her mind. Why had Helena left it there? Had she forgotten it? Or had she wanted Maria to find it? By late afternoon, Maria stood in the grand study, staring at the locked drawer. Dust motes floated lazily in the beam of sunlight cutting through the heavy curtains. The air was thick, silent, oppressive. Maria ran a cloth across the surface of the desk, tracing the faint circular imprint left by one of Helena's crystal tumblers. Her eyes landed again on the brass keyhole. She should leave it alone. But the questions were louder now. Helena had grown more distant, more frail. The last time Maria saw her, her employer's hands trembled as she sipped tea on the terrace, her once proud posture crumbling inward. Something was wrong. Maria felt it, and somehow she sensed that whatever was inside that drawer was tied to it. Before she could stop herself, Maria was climbing the stairs to Helena's bedroom. Her feet moved as if possessed. The door creaked as she entered, the scent of Helena's lavender perfume faint but lingering. There it was, the key. Maria reached out slowly this time, her fingertips brushing the cold metal. It felt heavier than it looked. She slipped it into the pocket of her apron and stood there for a moment, listening to the eerie silence of the house. No footsteps, no voices, no one to stop her. Maria walked back to the study, her heart pounding in her chest. She stared at the locked drawer one last time, then slid the key into the keyhole. It fit perfectly. She hesitated, her hand frozen on the handle, before turning the key. A soft click. Maria swallowed hard and slowly pulled open the drawer. Inside, neatly stacked, were several envelopes, dozens, each one addressed in Helena's elegant, looping handwriting. But there, at the very top of the pile, was an envelope that made Maria's breath catch in her throat. It was addressed to her, to Maria de Souza. Her knees nearly buckled. For a moment, all she could do was stare, the blood draining from her face. Why would Helena write her a letter? And hide it? Her fingers trembled as she reached out, sliding the envelope out from the stack. It was sealed. Maria sat down in Helena's leather chair, the letter heavy in her lap, her mind spinning with possibilities. Was it a warning? A confession? Goodbye? The house seemed to hold its breath as Maria ran her finger beneath the flap and broke the seal. She unfolded the letter, the crisp paper crackling in the tense silence. And then she began to read. Dear Maria. Her vision blurred as the words hit her, line after line, unraveling everything she thought she knew about her place in this house and her place in Helena's life. Maria's hand clutched the letter tighter, her chest heaving with each new revelation. This wasn't just a letter. It was the key to a secret that had been buried for 20 years, one that would change everything, forever. Chapter 3. The letters first. Blow Maria's hands trembled uncontrollably as her eyes scanned the neat, deliberate handwriting. The words on the page seemed to warp, stretch, and collapse all at once in her mind, as if her very reality were being rewritten line by line. Dear Maria, if you are reading this, it means the time has come to tell you what I should have told you years ago. Her breath caught. The house, so vast and silent, felt suddenly suffocating, the walls closing. In with every word, she gripped the armrests of the leather chair as her eyes continued moving down the page, each sentence more disorienting than the last. When you first came to work here, you were just a girl, so eager, so innocent, so trusting. Maria swallowed, hard, feeling her throat tighten. But there were things about this house, about me, that you never knew. A sudden, vivid memory flashed through Maria's mind. Herself, barely 18, standing on this very doorstep, clutching a small suitcase, her mother's faded scarf tied around her hair. She had been desperate for work, for safety. Helena had taken her in with what seemed back then like pure generosity. But now every act of kindness, every compliment, every small private conversation over afternoon tea felt as though it had been part of something else. The truth is, I owe you an apology and an explanation. Maria's pulse thundered in her ears. The letter went on. Years ago, long before you came here, I made choices, selfish, cruel choices that affected many lives. One of those lives was yours. Maria's body froze, her mind trying to process what that could possibly mean. You have always believed you came to this house by chance, through the agency that placed you. But that was never true. She gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth as her heart dropped like a stone in her chest. I arranged for you to come here. I have known who you were from the beginning. The paper trembled between her fingers. Her voice, hoarse, escaped. Her lips. What? Helena knew her? From before? Maria's eyes darted back to the letter, needing to devour more, to make sense of this new, twisted reality. You must understand. I did not know how to face you when you arrived. I was a coward, and so I allowed you to believe it was all coincidence. But it was not. A sharp, almost feral sob erupted from Maria's chest. The ground beneath her felt unstable, the very core of her identity crumbling as she read. You are not just my housekeeper, Maria. Her hands gripped the edges of the letter so tightly that the paper crinkled beneath her fingers. You are... The words blurred again through her tears. Maria wiped her eyes violently, forcing herself to keep going. You are my daughter's child. The silence of the room shattered in Maria's mind, like glass hitting marble. She shot up from the chair, the letter dropping to the floor as she staggered back, her body colliding with the edge of the desk. No, she whispered in disbelief, shaking her head violently. Her heart was pounding so hard that she could barely hear herself think. Her grandmother, Helena? Was her grandmother? Maria stumbled to the window, flinging it open as if gasping. for air would somehow make this moment less real. The view, once so familiar, so comforting with its rows of meticulously pruned hedges and the distant shimmer of the lake, now looked foreign, alien. Everything she had believed about herself, her life, her place in this house, had been a lie. Helena had known all these years, and Maria, she had been living under this roof, serving, caring, sacrificing for family. Unknowing, her mind reeled back through every interaction, the unexpected tenderness Helena had shown her on her first Christmas there, the way Helena insisted Maria join the family dinners sometimes, the rare, almost secretive glances Helena would give her when she thought Maria wasn't looking. None of it had been random. Maria collapsed back into the chair, her chest heaving. She forced her shaking hands to pick the letter up again, knowing there was more. Your mother, Sophia, ran away when she was only 19. She was headstrong, impulsive, desperate to escape the constraints of this family. Of me. She never told me she was pregnant. I only found out years later after it was too late. Maria's entire body was vibrating. Her mother had always refused to speak about her own past. Now Maria understood why. When I finally discovered where she had gone and what had happened, it broke me. She had passed, and you were left alone, adrift. A low, guttural moan escaped Maria's throat. I could not bring you into my life openly. My pride, my shame, they stopped me. But I could not abandon you entirely. So I arranged for you to come here, to be safe, to be cared for, even if from a distance. The weight of those words crushed Maria, all the years of feeling like a servant, of sleeping in the attic while Helena lived in luxury, of swallowing her own dreams to serve someone else's life. And yet, that someone else had been her blood, her family, the very woman she called Mrs. Helena all these years was her grandmother. Maria sank to the floor, the letter falling from her hands once again. Tears streamed down her face, soaking into the carpet. The house was silent save for her quiet, broken sobs. But as she sat there, lost in a storm of grief, rage, betrayal, and something else she could not yet name, a small, chilling thought crept into her mind. Why now? Why had Helena left the key out now, after 20 years of silence? What had changed? Maria wiped her tears, staring back at the drawer, at the other unopened letters, still waiting there like ghosts of secrets yet to come. And for the first time in her life, Maria wasn't sure she wanted to know, but she also knew she had no choice. Chapter 4. The Weight of Silence. The rest of the day unfolded like a surreal dream from which Maria couldn't wake. The house, with its polished oak floors and the scent of lavender polish lingering faintly in the air, seemed like a stage set for a life that was no longer hers. No, it had never been hers. She had simply played her part without knowing the script. Maria's steps echoed through the long, silent hallways as she wandered aimlessly, her mind replaying the letter's words, again and again. You are my daughter's child. Every syllable of that confession haunted her, twisting through her thoughts like ivy, wrapping tighter with every breath she took. She ended up in the conservatory, her favorite room, the place she had once found solace after long days of work. The towering glass walls, draped with creeping vines, now felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. Dropping onto the worn leather bench nestled between two giant ferns, she buried her face in her hands. How many times had she sat here with Helena? The memory came unbidden. Helena standing by the orchids, her voice soft but distant as she spoke about life, loss, and resilience. At the time, Maria thought it was just Helena's way, aloof, enigmatic, but now she knew. Every word had been weighed, filtered, controlled. Helena had known all along who Maria was, and had chosen silence. The realization made Maria's stomach turn with a bitter nausea. 20 years. 2 decades of sweeping, dusting, cooking, serving. All the while, Helena had sat across from her at the dinner table, looked her in the eyes, smiled, and said nothing. Why? Why hadn't she said something, told her the truth? Was it shame, pride, or something darker? Maria stood abruptly, the bench creaking in protest. She stormed back through the house, her feet guiding her with purpose she didn't fully understand until she reached the study once more. The drawer was still open, the remaining letters still there untouched. Her pulse quickened as her hand hovered over them. She picked up the next envelope. It too had her name, written in that same delicate, sloping script. But this one was dated 10 years ago. Maria hesitated, her fingers trembling as she broke the seal. The paper inside was thinner, more fragile, as though the weight of the secret had worn it down over time. My dearest Maria, it has been 10 years since you first came to live here, and not a day has passed that I haven't struggled with my silence. Maria's throat constricted. You've grown into a woman I admire more than you can know. Watching. You care for this home, for me, has been both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because you are here, safe. A curse because I have been too much a coward to claim you as my own. Maria inhaled sharply, her chest aching. I fear that if I tell you the truth, you will hate me for what I did to your mother. For how I failed her, and by extension, you. Maria's eyes burned with unshed tears. But I also know that one day I will no longer have the luxury of postponing this confession. One day you will find these letters and you will know everything. She pressed the page to her chest, her heart fracturing anew. Helena had written this, knowing she would never say the words aloud. Maria looked around the study, the dark mahogany, shelves filled with books, the grand fireplace with its cold, empty hearth, the antique clock ticking solemnly in the corner. This was Helena's world, her fortress, her prison. Maria realized then that Helena had lived with her own kind of torment. All these years, trapped by a secret she couldn't bear to reveal, yet couldn't bring herself to forget. But that realization didn't soothe Maria's own pain. If anything, it made the wound more complex, layered with the bitter weight of empathy. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the first on the desk. Then her eyes fell to the remaining envelopes. 5 more, each one, undoubtedly, filled with revelations she wasn't sure she could handle. Her hand hovered above them again before pulling back, her resolve crumbling beneath the enormity of the moment. She needed air, space, escape. Maria rushed from the study, down the marble staircase, and out through the grand double doors into the vast garden that stretched behind the house. The sun was low in the sky, casting long, slanting shadows across the manicured hedges and the marble statues that dotted the grounds. Like silent sentinels, she walked blindly, her feet crunching over the gravel paths until she reached the lake at the property's edge. The water, still and glassy, reflected the dusky sky above. Maria sank onto the wooden bench at the dock's end, her body folding in on itself. Tears slid down her cheeks, dripping onto her clasped hands. How was she supposed to make sense of this? Her whole life, everything she believed about herself, her family, her place in the world, had been constructed on lies of omission. The woman she had trusted most, whom she had cared for through sickness and health, joy and sorrow, had been her blood all along, and now Helena was gone. Maria would never be able to confront her, to demand answers, to scream, to cry, to ask why, over and over, until the pain dulled. All she had were these letters, silent relics of truths, withheld for too long. The sky darkened as the first stars blinked into existence above the lake. Maria stayed there, motionless, her thoughts spiraling into the night. She wasn't ready to return to the house. Not yet. Not until she was strong enough to face the rest of the letters and the rest of the truth. But deep down, she knew. Tomorrow, she would go. Back to that study. She would open every last envelope, and finally, she would piece together the story of who she really was, even if it shattered her completely. Chapter 5. Echoes in the Walls. The morning light crept through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the walls of Maria's modest room at the back of the mansion. For the first time in years, she hadn't made the bed the moment she rose, nor had she rushed to prepare breakfast for the household staff. The house, usually maintained with clockwork precision, could wait. Maria sat at the edge of the bed, the letter from yesterday still on the nightstand, folded and worn from the hours she had spent reading and rereading it in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. Her mind was no less cluttered than it had been the night before, but her body had slipped into a sort of mechanical motion, the habit of 2 decades overriding the chaos within. She stood, washed her face, and dressed in the same simple uniform she always wore. But when she passed the mirror above her dresser, she paused. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same. The familiar lines around her eyes, the dark circles from years of early mornings and late nights, they were all there. But her eyes, they no longer belonged to someone invisible. They belonged to someone who had history embedded deep in her blood, a story buried beneath layers of omission and cowardice. With a heavy breath, Maria walked out of her room and back toward the study. Every step echoed louder than usual, as though the house itself was aware of what she was about to do. When she entered the study, it was as she had left it, the desk littered with opened envelopes and fragile papers, the lingering scent of aged parchment mixing with the faint aroma of Helena's favorite rosewater perfume that still clung to the drapes. Maria stared at the remaining letters, her chest tightening. 5 more. 5 fragments of a life Helena had, never spoken aloud. She sat down, hands braced on the desk, and pulled the next letter free. The seal cracked softly as she unfolded the paper. Maria, if you're reading this, it means you've found the others. I imagine you're hurt, confused, perhaps even angry. Maria's jaw clenched. Angry didn't even begin to cover it. Please know that my silence was never because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to reconcile my love for you with the fear of how you might see me if you knew the truth. Maria exhaled shakily. Your mother, my daughter, was my greatest sorrow and my greatest failure. She left this house long before you were born, running from a life she never wanted and a mother who never truly understood her. By the time I found out about you, she was gone. Maria's eyes widened, her pulse quickening. Gone? As in dead? Helena hadn't clarified. Maria continued reading, her hands trembling. I tried to find you. God knows I tried. But the system had already taken you in, shuffled you through homes until you eventually ended up here, under this very roof, under a different name, with no idea of who I was to you. Maria's breath caught in her throat. The irony of it, to have been plucked from foster care by an employment agency, placed in the mansion that unknowingly housed her own grandmother. It was almost too much to process. When I realized who you were, I froze. I told myself it wasn't possible, but the records confirmed it. Still, I couldn't bring myself to tell you. I feared you'd leave, and I was selfish enough to want you near even if it meant you never knew the truth. Tears slid silently down Maria's cheeks. So, I let you stay. I let you call me madam. And I called you Maria, never once allowing myself to call you what I wanted most. Granddaughter. Maria folded the letter, her heart heavy with Helena's cowardice and her own conflicted grief. All these years of thinking she was merely the help, and all this time, she'd been family. Her hands hovered over the next envelope, but she hesitated. She pushed back from the desk, pacing the room. The walls, lined with generations of family portraits, now seemed like silent witnesses to her pain. She stopped before a large gilded painting of Helena in her youth, standing tall beside a young girl with striking dark eyes, eyes that mirrored Maria's own. Could it be? Maria stepped closer, inspecting the small plaque beneath the portrait. Helena and Elena, 1967. Elena, her mother. Maria's knees weakened as she sank onto the chaise lounge across the room, the realization settling like lead in her stomach. She wasn't just part of this family, she was all that remained. Everyone else was gone. Helena, Elena, all gone. And here she was, sitting in this mausoleum of secrets, clutching letters like they were lifelines to ghosts. For a long time, Maria sat in silence, the clock ticking steadily, in the corner. Then, with renewed determination, she returned to the desk. She wouldn't stop now. She had to know everything. One by one, she opened the next 3 letters, each revealing more of the fractured family history. The affair that had driven Elena away from the house, the man she had loved, but whom Helena had disapproved of, the tragic car accident that had taken Elena's life when Maria was just a baby. Helena's years of searching, of regret, of guilt, and finally the truth of how Maria had been brought into this house by sheer chance, or perhaps by fate. By the time Maria finished reading, her face was wet with tears, her chest hollow yet, heavy with the weight of all she had learned. The final envelope sat alone on the desk, the last piece of Helena's voice. Maria reached for it with a reverence that surprised even herself. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Maria, this is my last confession, and perhaps my greatest failure. When you read this, I will be gone. I only ask that you find it in your heart to forgive me, not for me, but for yourself. Do not let my cowardice dictate the rest of your life. You are more than the sum of these secrets. You are strong, kind, and worthy of every happiness this world can offer. Please, live your life free from the shadows I've cast. With all my love, always, Helena. Maria's hands slipped from the desk, falling to her lap as she sat in stunned silence. The words echoed in her mind like a prayer, a benediction, a plea. After everything, Helena hadn't wanted absolution. She had wanted Maria's freedom. And now, for the first time, Maria understood what that meant. She stood slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the vast garden Helena had so loved. The sun was rising steadily, over the hedges, casting golden light across the dew-soaked grass. Maria inhaled deeply, her lungs filling with air that somehow felt newer, purer. Her past was written, but her future, that was still hers to define. Chapter 6, Cleaning Out the Ghosts. The morning after reading the final letter, Maria woke with an unfamiliar sense of clarity. The air in the mansion felt different, less oppressive, as if the house itself had exhaled along with her the night before. She pulled back the curtains in her small room and let the sunlight flood in, illuminating the well-worn furniture, the framed photograph of her with the house staff from years ago, and the neatly folded uniforms stacked on the shelf. But today, Maria didn't reach for the uniform. Instead, she dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, the kind of clothes she rarely wore outside of her one day off a month. She stood in front of the mirror and studied herself carefully. No longer just the housekeeper, no longer just the help. Now, the heir to a legacy steeped in secrets and regrets. And yet, also the survivor of it. The house was quieter than usual as she made her way down the corridor. For 20 years, these halls had echoed with the clicks of her shoes, the muted instructions from Helena, the distant sounds of guests being entertained in the grand parlor. Now there was only silence, punctuated by the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Maria's footsteps led her to the study once more, the place where her world had changed irrevocably. She stood by the desk, running her fingertips along its polished surface, then glanced toward the pile of letters she had carefully refolded and stacked the night before. What now? The question had lingered in her mind all night, refusing to be ignored. She could leave, pack her things, and walk away from the house that had both sheltered and imprisoned her for 2 decades. But as Maria looked around the study, the bookshelves, lined with first editions, the antique globe in the corner, the faded Persian rug she had vacuumed every week for years, she realized this place was as much a part of her as the blood in her veins. And then her eyes landed on the key, the same ornate brass key that Helena had always kept in the locked drawer of her desk. Maria had seen it countless times, watching as Helena retrieved important documents but never daring to ask what else was kept in that secret compartment. Now, with no one left to stop her, Maria slid the key into the drawers, locked and turned it. A soft click echoed through the still room. Slowly, she pulled the drawer open. Inside, beneath a stack of Helena's personal papers, was a small leather-bound journal. Maria hesitated for a moment, then carefully lifted it out. The leather was worn and supple, the corners frayed from years of use. She opened to the first page and gasped softly, in Helena's unmistakable handwriting, "For Maria, when the time is right." Maria sank into the chair, her hands trembling as she turned the page. The journal wasn't filled with business records or estate plans as she had expected. It was filled with Helena's thoughts, raw, unfiltered, vulnerable. There were entries about Elena, her estranged daughter, laced with both love and bitterness. Entries about Maria's arrival in the house, how Helena had struggled with the decision to keep her close yet silent. But most surprising of all were the entries about the house itself. "This house has always been my sanctuary and my prison," Helena had written in one entry dated 10 years ago. "And now I see that it has become the same for Maria. How do I set her free?" Maria swallowed hard, her chest tightening with each word. The journal detailed Helena's private grappling with her choices, her regret at not telling Maria sooner, and her hope that one day Maria would forgive her. As Maria read, she realized that Helena had left her more than just a hidden lineage. She had left her the truth, all of it. After hours lost in the journal's pages, Maria finally closed it and placed it gently on the desk. She leaned back in the chair, closing, her eyes allowing the enormity of everything to wash over her. When she finally stood, she knew what she had to do. She walked to the parlor where the house phone sat on a side table and dialed the number for Mr. Patel, the family's longtime attorney. "Mr. Patel, it's Maria. Maria Alvarez." There was a pause on the other end, then a polite but curious response. "Yes, Maria. How can I help you?" Maria took a deep breath. "I found something. Letters, a journal, and the will." Mr. Patel's voice changed immediately, tinged with both professionalism and genuine concern. "I see. I can be there within the hour." Maria hung up and sat quietly on the edge of the parlor sofa, staring at the grand chandelier above, the same one she had dusted meticulously for years. Soon, someone official would come and confirm everything. Soon, she would have to make decisions about the estate, the house, her future. But for now, she simply sat there, in the heart of the home that had concealed so many truths, and allowed herself to breathe. For the first time, not as the housekeeper, but as the woman who finally knew who she was. Chapter 7. Confronting the Legacy. By the time Mr. Patel arrived, a light drizzle had begun outside, misting the vast windows of the mansion and casting a soft, melancholic haze over the estate grounds. Maria met him at the door, her posture no longer that of the housekeeper waiting for instructions, but of a woman prepared to face her inheritance, both material and emotional. "Maria," he greeted her with a warm but professional nod, stepping inside and removing his coat. "I came as quickly as I could." She led him silently to the study where the journal, letters, and will were carefully arranged on the desk as though they'd always belonged there. Mr. Patel paused, surveying the scene with a measured, almost reverent air. "I've never been in this room," he confessed quietly. Maria offered a small, knowing smile. Most weren't allowed. He sat down, adjusting his glasses before picking up the will first. As he read, his brow furrowed, his eyes darting back and forth across the pages, confirming details with a precision Maria had long admired but never personally witnessed. "I had suspected something like this," he finally said, looking up at her. "But Helena was discreet." "That's one word for it," Maria whispered, a trace of bitterness slipping through. Mr. Patel sighed, setting the will aside. "Do you understand what this means, Maria?" She nodded, though the reality of it still felt surreal. "The house, the estate, it's all mine." "Yes," he confirmed, "but it's more than just property. This is a significant inheritance, investments, trusts, even international holdings. Helena planned meticulously. She ensured that you would be provided for long after her passing." Maria ran her hands through her hair, exhaling sharply. "I don't know if I'm ready for this." Mr. Patel leaned forward, his expression softening. "You've been managing this house for 2 decades, Maria, quietly, diligently. You're more prepared than anyone Helena could have chosen." That reassurance settled into her chest like a warming ember. Still, there was the gnawing question. Did she really choose me? Or was this just guilt? She didn't voice it. Instead, she asked, "And Elena, her daughter?" Mr. Patel's face darkened slightly. "Estranged for years. Helena tried, but—" He shook his head. "Elena made her choices. The will is explicit, everything is to go to you. There are no legal ambiguities." Maria swallowed hard, her mind flashing to the image of a woman she had only met once, in passing years ago. Elegant, cold, and distant even then. "She won't contest? It's possible," he admitted, "but unlikely. Elena has made it clear she wants nothing to do with this place." Maria stared out the window, the rain now a steady rhythm against the glass. All her life she had dreamed of more, but never like this. The riches, the property. They all felt secondary to what she had truly longed for: acknowledgement, belonging, truth. And now that she had all three, they felt heavier than she could have imagined. Mr. Patel stood, gathering the documents. "I'll begin the formal process. Probate will take some time, but I expect no major complications." Maria nodded absently, still staring at the rain. As he made his way to the door, he paused. "Maria, if I may?" She turned to him. "I've represented this family for over 30 years. I've seen what wealth and secrets can do to people. If I can offer one piece of advice—" "Please," she urged. He smiled gently. "Don't let the ghosts of this house dictate your future. Helena wanted you to be free. Take that seriously." Maria's throat tightened, but she managed a nod. "Thank you, Mr. Patel." When he left, Maria stood alone once more in the grand house, the rain drumming steadily in the background. She walked through each room slowly, taking in the place not as the caretaker, but as its owner. The grand staircase where she used to polish every baluster. The dining hall where she served meals to Helena's guests, never once sitting at the table herself. The sunroom where she had spent her rare moments of rest, always careful to clean up after herself, as though her very presence was an intrusion. Now, all of it belonged to her. But with ownership came an overwhelming awareness. This house had not just been Helena's prison. It had been Maria's, too. She paused in front of the mirror in the foyer, the same one she used to check her uniform for stray wrinkles before starting her long shifts. Now, she looked at herself differently, older, wiser, still carrying the quiet dignity that had sustained her all these years, but also finally visible, no longer hidden behind service or silence. The house creaked as the wind pressed against its aged walls, and for the first time in 2 decades, Maria didn't feel afraid of its sounds. She felt in control. Not of the house itself, perhaps, that would take time, but of her own story. And for a woman who had spent 20 years cleaning up the lives of others, that was the most profound inheritance of all. She turned away from the mirror and walked up the stairs, each step echoing like a quiet proclamation. I am here. I belong. And this is mine. Chapter 8. The Visit. The following week passed in a blur of legal documents, calls with Mr. Patel, and awkward encounters with the remaining staff, who now looked to Maria not as a fellow housekeeper, but as the woman who owned the estate. The dynamics shifted subtly but irrevocably, and Maria found herself navigating a new, unfamiliar role. She had spent the last 2 days alone in the mansion, having given the other staff time off to process the news and make their own decisions about staying or leaving. The silence was different now, less oppressive, more contemplative, until the doorbell rang. It was an unexpected sound, jarring, slicing through the quiet like a blade. Maria descended the grand staircase, heart thudding, and opened the door, to find a woman standing there, her designer coat soaked from the persistent drizzle, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses. Elena, Maria breathed, Helena's daughter. The resemblance was undeniable. The same high cheekbones, the same sharp eyes, though Elena's carried more ice than warmth. "May I come in?" Elena asked, her tone clipped but controlled. Maria hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. "Of course." Elena entered, shaking off her coat and surveying the mansion with a dispassionate gaze, as though it were a museum exhibit rather than the house she once called home. "I heard about my mother," Elena said flatly, removing her sunglasses to reveal red-rimmed eyes that contradicted her otherwise stoic demeanor. "I'm sorry for your loss," Maria replied quietly. Elena gave a brittle laugh. Loss implies something was there to begin with. Maria swallowed the lump rising in her throat. She had no idea what to say to that. They stood there, the silence between them thick and complicated. Finally, Elena turned to her. "I also heard about the will." Maria's hands clenched around the hem of her sweater. "Yes." Elena let out another humorless laugh, her heels clicking as she walked further into the foyer, trailing her fingers along the antique console table as though reacquainting herself with ghosts. "So my mother left everything to her maid." Maria winced but didn't correct her. "I didn't ask for this," Maria said, her voice steady. Elena spun around, eyes flashing. "Didn't you?" Maria inhaled sharply. "No." Elena stared at her for a long, hard moment, then sighed, slumping, slightly against the banister. "You know, she always said she loved this house more than anything. Anyone. I used to think that was a figure of speech." Maria watched her carefully, unsure whether to comfort or stay silent. Elena shook her head, her expression a mixture of resentment and fatigue. "I hated this place. Every gilded corner, every silent dinner, every Christmas spent alone while she entertained politicians and businessmen in that goddamn dining room." Maria's throat tightened. "I know," she said softly. Elena's eyes snapped to her. "No, you don't." Maria stood her ground. "You're right, not in the way." "You do, but I know what it's like to feel invisible in this house." Elena's expression cracked for a brief second. Then she looked away, pacing toward the large window that framed the fog-covered garden. "She left you everything," Elena repeated, more to herself than to Maria. "I didn't ask for any of it," Maria repeated, more firmly this time. Elena let out a shaky breath, then finally turned back to her. "I'm not here to contest the will," she said abruptly. Maria blinked, surprised. "You're not?" "No." Elena smirked bitterly. "I have my own life, my own money. What could I possibly want from this mausoleum?" Maria exhaled slowly, the tension in her chest loosening by a fraction. Elena moved closer, studying her as though seeing her for the first time. "But I had to see it with my own eyes," she said, "that she really left it all to you." Maria nodded quietly. "And you know why?" Elena asked, her tone less accusatory now, more curious. Maria hesitated. I think she trusted me to care for it, the way she couldn't anymore." Elena let out a hollow laugh. She couldn't care for anyone. The words hung in the air like a condemnation neither of them dared refute. After a long pause, Elena adjusted her purse strap and walked toward the door. "I'm not staying," she said without looking back. Maria followed her, unsure whether to say something more, to stop her, to ask the questions that had burned in her mind for years about their fractured relationship. But in the end, she said simply, "Goodbye, Elena." Elena paused on the threshold, then turned, her expression softer than it had been all day. "Goodbye, Maria," and then she was gone. Maria stood there for a long time after the door closed, staring at the rain-slicked driveway where Elena's car disappeared into the mist. It was over. Not just the visit, the confrontation, the doubt, the unspoken battle over who Helena had truly loved. And somehow, in that absence, Maria felt a quiet, unexpected peace settle over her. The house creaked again, as it always did in the rain. But for the first time, it didn't sound like loneliness. It sounded like space. Space for something new. Space for Maria. Chapter 9. The Hidden Room. The days after Elena's visit stretched into a strange calm, as if the house itself had finally exhaled after decades of tightly held secrets. Maria resumed her quiet routines, though they were now tinged with an odd, surreal awareness that everything, every corner, every item belonged to her. One morning, while organizing boxes in the attic, a part of the house she had rarely entered in all her years there, she stumbled upon something unexpected. Behind a faded tapestry of a hunting scene, the wall sounded hollow when she brushed against it. Frowning, Maria ran her fingers along the paneling, searching. A faint groove. Her heart sped up. She pushed, and with a groan of ancient hinges, a narrow section of the wall creaked open, revealing a small, dust-choked room. Maria gasped. The room was filled with artifacts from Helena's past. Old journals, boxes of letters, faded photographs, and at the center, a heavy, intricately carved wooden chest. Trembling, Maria approached, kneeling beside it. The lock was rusted but brittle. With a determined twist of a nearby tool, it snapped open. Inside, more letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Helena. Some from influential political figures, others from artists, lovers, and friends long gone. But one bundle was tied with a delicate red ribbon, different from the rest. Maria lifted it carefully. The handwriting, her own name, the same looping script that had signed the letter that changed her life weeks ago. Her breath caught in her throat. She unfolded the first letter. "Maria, if you are reading this, then you've already found one truth about me. But there are more, buried in this house and in my own flawed heart. I didn't know how to say it when I was alive, but you were my only true family. I watched you care for this home and for me when I could not even care for myself. You may think I was cold, distant, but I want you to know that I saw you. I saw your strength, your kindness, your integrity, and I loved you for it, in my own imperfect way. These letters are yours, my life in fragments. Perhaps they will explain why I made the choices I did. I hope they give you peace. Helena. Maria's vision blurred with tears as she clutched the fragile paper against her chest. All these years, she had believed Helena to be unreachable, a cold, untouchable figure of power. But here, in this hidden room, Helena had left pieces of herself, vulnerable, human, broken, and, in her own way, loving. Maria spent hours there, reading through letter after letter, each one peeling back layers of the woman she had served for decades. Some spoke of Helena's regrets, abandoning relationships, prioritizing appearances over affection, fearing vulnerability more than loneliness. Others described Helena's admiration for Maria, how she had marveled at Maria's quiet resilience, her unwavering loyalty even when treated as invisible. By sunset, Maria sat on the floor amid the scattered papers, drained but somehow full. It was not just the house she had inherited. It was Helena's legacy, her pain, her love, her truth. Maria closed her eyes, leaning against the cool wooden chest, and whispered, "I see you too, Helena." For the first time, she felt not like a trespasser in this grand estate, but like its rightful keeper. No longer just the maid, but the woman Helena had chosen to entrust with everything. As the attic grew darker, Maria gathered the letters, placing them gently back into the chest. She would read them all in time. But for now, she descended the attic steps with a quiet determination. There was still one more thing she needed to do. One more chapter of this story to write, her own. Chapter 10. Her own legacy. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the sunlight streaming through the grand windows of the estate, illuminating the walls that had witnessed decades of secrets, love, betrayal, and silence. Maria stood at the entrance of the house, her reflection framed in the antique mirror where, for 20 years, she had quietly passed without ever daring to look too long. But today, she allowed herself to stand tall, her shoulders no longer slouched, in subservience. Her hands no longer clutched cleaning rags or dusters, but the keys to the house, the literal and symbolic proof that this was now her home. She walked out to the garden where, for years, she had tended to Helena's favorite, roses. They were in bloom now, lush and fragrant, as if the earth itself recognized the shift that had taken place. Sitting on the old wrought iron bench, Maria opened the last of the letters she had found the day before. "Maria, I know this will come as a shock to you. Perhaps you will feel angry that I did not say these things to you when I was alive. I was too proud, too afraid. But you must know that I always considered you family. More than family. You reminded me of everything I wanted to be but never had the courage to become. This house, my possessions, they are yours because you earned them with your heart, your care, and your dignity. Live here, Maria. Make it yours. Fill these empty rooms with laughter, warmth, and life. Please forgive me for all the years I kept you at a distance. With love, Helena." Tears slipped quietly down Maria's cheeks, but they weren't tears of sorrow. Not anymore. They were tears of release, of closure, of quiet joy. For so long, Maria had defined herself by absence, the absence of love, recognition, ownership. But now she realized she had been seen all along. And more than that, she had been chosen. Later that week, she contacted an old friend, Lucia, a woman she hadn't spoken to in years due to her all-consuming role in Helena's household. Maria invited her for coffee in what was now her own, sunlit kitchen. When Lucia arrived, her eyes widened at the grandeur of the estate. "Maria, this is your house?" she asked, incredulous. Maria smiled softly, stirring sugar into her coffee. "It is," she replied. "It finally is." Word slowly spread through the small town of the woman who had quietly worked as a maid for 2 decades, only to inherit the grand estate from the formidable and mysterious Helena Moretti. Some whispered in admiration, others in disbelief. But Maria didn't concern herself with their voices. Instead, she opened the house, room by room, day by day, transforming the cold, distant mansion into a warm haven. She painted the walls with lighter colors, filled the empty spaces with fresh flowers, and hosted gatherings for the local community. Children's laughter echoed in the halls that had once been silent. In the evenings, Maria would sit in the library, a cup of chamomile tea in hand, reading through Helena's journals. She learned about the woman's youthful dreams, her heartbreaks, her struggles with her own upbringing, and the societal pressures that had shaped her into the aloof figure Maria had known. She no longer saw Helena as just her former employer. She saw her as a flawed human being who had ultimately made a choice to right her wrongs in the only way she knew how, and Maria chose to accept that. One afternoon, while organizing papers in the study, Maria found a small framed photograph tucked behind a bookshelf. It was of her and Helena, taken years ago during one of the rare Christmas dinners they shared. Helena wasn't smiling, but Maria could see now what she hadn't then. The softness in Helena's eyes, the way she had positioned herself protectively close to Maria. Maria placed the photo on the mantel, next to a vase of fresh lilies. She had made peace with the past. She had forgiven Helena, and more importantly, she had stepped fully into her own life. No longer defined by service, but by ownership. No longer silenced by duty, but empowered by choice. On the anniversary of Helena's passing, Maria visited her grave at the family plot behind the estate. She placed a single white rose on the headstone and whispered, "Thank you." As she walked back toward the house, the late afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across the manicured lawn, Maria felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not just from servitude, but from the invisible chains of unspoken love, unacknowledged worth, and unseen strength. She smiled as she stepped into her home, the place where she had once been invisible, now forever imprinted with her story, her legacy, her truth. Sometimes the greatest inheritances are not the ones written in legal documents, but the silent recognitions, the late confessions, and the unexpected choices that affirm a person's worth. Maria's story is a testament to resilience, quiet dignity, and the power of hidden love finally brought to light. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe to Betrayal and Forgiveness for more emotional narratives about the hidden betrayals and unexpected redemptions that shape our lives. Share this video with someone who believes in the quiet power of dignity, resilience, and forgiveness. And remember, sometimes the greatest victories are the ones no one else sees, but you feel deeply within your soul. Join us for the next story, where another secret will be uncovered and another heart will face the ultimate choice: betrayal or forgiveness.